our lesson on rational numbers. We're going to be working kind of in the middle of the note packet at the least common denominator part. So as we move forward here, working on establishing a least common denominator, it's important to remember the parts of a fraction. So remember the top, the 5 here, is called the numerator. And the bottom, the 8, that's the denominator. So when we say we're finding the least common denominator, we're focusing mainly on the bottom portion of the fraction. So the reason we work on establishing a least common denominator is because in order to add or subtract fractions, you need to establish a common denominator. Okay, let's take a look at number 1. Our first two fractions here are 5 over 8 plus 11 over 12. So to find a least common denominator, we're going to consider multiples of 8 and 12, and we're going to pick the smallest multiple they have in common. So let's think about multiples of 8. 1 times 8 equals 8. 2 times 8 is 16. 3 times 8 is 24. 4 times 8 is 32. So let's take a look at multiples of 12 and we'll see if they have any of these in common. 1 times 12, that's 12. 2 times 12, that's 24. 3 times 12, that's 36. So let's take a look here. 8, that's down to count 16, 24.
24.
Okay, so 24 is their least common multiple that they have in common. So if we can establish the lowest common denominator of 24, we'll be able to add these fractions. So our fractions were, just recopy them here, 5 eighths and 11 twelfths.
Our fractions were Mr.
Okay, we're going to change both of these denominators to have a denominator of 24 because it will be a common denominator. So how do we do that? Well, we consider, if we want 8 to be 24, we look at our list, well, 8 times 3 is 24, so we would have to multiply it by 3. Now, rules of fractions say that whatever you do to the bottom, as long as you do it also to the top, really, you're not changing your fraction, you're just writing it in a different form. So 8 times 3 is 24. Since we multiply the bottom by 3, we also want to multiply the top by 3. 5 times 3 is 15. And we do the same thing to our second fraction. Okay, so 12. How do we make 12 into 24? We multiply it by 2. If we're going to multiply the bottom of this fraction by 2, we also have to multiply the top of this fraction by 2. 11 times 2 is 22. Now we have two fractions with a common denominator, and we can add these. 15 plus 22, 37 over 24. Okay, let's do another one. Number 2, we're looking at 1 over 9 plus 5 over 6. We're going to do the same thing. Remember, we're working with denominators, so we take the number on the bottom. 9 and 6, we'll list the multiples and find a common number. 1 times 9 is 9. 2 times 9 is 18. And 3 times 9 is 27. let's think about 6. 1 times 6 we know is 6. 2 times 6, that's 12. 3 times 6, 18. And now I can see that we have a common multiple here. 18. We're going to use 18 as our lowest common denominator. So again, I have to consider, how do I change 1/9 into a fraction with the denominator of 18? Well, 9 times 2 is 18. And I know I can't just multiply the bottom of this fraction by 2, I also have to multiply the top. 1 times 2 is 2. And I'll do the same thing here with the 6. How do I make this 6 into an 18? Well, I multiply it by 3. I can't just do it to the bottom, I also have to do it to the top. So now I have 2 fractions with a common denominator, and I can add them. 2, I'll just add right across the top. 2 plus 15 is 17. And leave that denominator 18. Okay, one last example. Okay, we're going to find a least common denominator by looking at both denominators of these fractions. Our first one being 28. And our second one being 14. Okay, well think about our multiples of 28. 1 times 28 is 28. 2 times 28, 56. Now we'll look at 14. 1 times 14, that's 14. 2 times 14, that's 28. So, our least common denominator here will be 28. Okay, so now looking at my first fraction, 4 over 28, what would I have to do to 28 to make it look like our least common denominator? Well, nothing. 28 times 1 is 28. So if I just multiply the top and bottom by 1, I'm really keeping the original fraction. The second fraction, how do I make 14 into 28? I multiply it by 2. So I'll multiply the top by 2 and be left with 12. Add these fractions together. 4 plus 12 is 16, all over 28. That was our least common denominator. We were able to add our fractions. Okay, now in order to practice this, you want to go on to IXL, and you're working in lessons D.2 and D.3.